I never expected for N N-DMT to completely change my life forever, my art, and my whole career, but it did. And even though I had worked with many psychedelics prior to it, nothing had impacted me and my career as a whole as much as N N-DMT. In fact, I would say it is the exact starting point of my visionary art journey about 7 or 8 years ago. When I first tried DMT, that's when I completely shifted my art career and started to particularly focus on creating visionary art, mostly inspired by these DMT experiences. So let me give some context of what led up to this point. At the time, when I first tried N N-DMT, I already had quite a bit of experience with psychedelics. My first time working with a psychedelic was at the age of 16, starting with LSD. Very shortly after, I kept working with quite a bit of psychedelics, working with mushrooms and then experimenting with peyote and a variety of other psychedelics. After that, I started working with ayahuasca, which, even though it is DMT, it wasn't as impactful. It wasn't until about 7 or 8 years ago, when I was around the age of around 22, that I first did N N-DMT in its pure vaporized form, that really changed everything. So before that, even though I was working with psychedelics, my arts almost felt separate from these experiences. I was at the time trying to find my art style. I went through periods of doing hyperrealism with pencil and ebony graphite drawings and doing abstract pieces. I did some surrealist pieces also. And every so often, I would have one of my psychedelic journeys trickle into my art and I would make something slightly visionary, but it wasn't a consistent theme. And I would attribute this to the fact that all the other psychedelic experiences I had prior to NN, these substances were substances that lasted a very long time. But these journeys, I would basically go in there, and the peak of the journey, the part where I was really immersed in these other realms and seeing these beautiful visionary things, I was very heavily in that space. But if I tried to sketch while I was in that state, my hands were very shaky and they'd just come out as scribbles. By the time that the substance completely faded, maybe LSD, mushrooms, ayahuasca, by the time I was clear headed, since these journeys were so long, I was completely exhausted. So I'd usually go to sleep. And by the time I'd wake up, a lot of those peak important visuals had become very faint because it's like a dream. When you wake up at first, it's very vivid, very fresh, but the more time goes on, the more it starts to fade. And if you don't write it down for 8 hours later, it could be just a faint memory and it's not as exciting, not as detailed. So that's what was happening a lot with these psychedelic journeys of mine. I would have these very profound journeys. During them, I would sketch, but it'd just be scribbles because my hands were shaky and I was like in there. And after that, I'd be exhausted, sleep, and wake up, and most of it had faded. So it didn't trickle its way into my art. But when I tried N N-DMT, it was the first time that I tried a substance that got me deep in there, like full breakthrough experience. And it only lasts about 15 minutes. By the time those 15 minutes pass, very quickly you go back to being fully sober. And that speed of going to the deepest moment of the journey, boom, launched into full breakthrough, and then boom, back to complete sober. That quickness is what allowed me to bring these visions back very clearly. It was when I did that I was like, wow, And I remembered it all still because it was so recent. It was just I'd come out and I started sketching immediately. And that starting to sketch immediately allowed me to bring through so many ideas, so much information from that space that I had so much art I wanted to create from it. And it was so clear. So it was really that the formatting of the time of that particular substance that allowed me to create art from it. And not only was it the time, I would say N N-DMT touched a part of my soul that felt like that was it. I don't know how else to say it, but I felt like I had a maybe other people feel this way, but in my own journey, I felt like I had a special connection with this substance and with that particular space. Some of the other spaces I had been to on other psychedelics were very beautiful, but there was something particularly unique and familiar. Other ones had seemed familiar, but there was something that resonated with my being very deeply, where that felt like, oh, yeah, that's the one that is for me. That's my dedicated medicine for my journey. And it was also about the particular journeys I had with NN-DMT. The message was so clear and so vivid and so direct. And after those experiences, the first few times I did it, it was so obvious that I needed to be creating art about this and nothing else because everything else just seemed paled in comparison with how inspiring those experiences were for my journey. That I started to meditate on this and I was like, why am I making art about anything but these spiritual realms? I started to gain a lot of clarity that one can make art of abstract things and they can be beautiful in expressing emotion, or one can make realistic things. Printers can do that, photographs can do that. And it's something that it's already there. But I started to see how, with having these intense psychedelic and spiritual experiences, a camera can't go there. And a lot of people don't go there unless they do it themselves. And even the people that do it themselves, it's hard to remember sometimes. It starts to fade and you can't really take a souvenir. But artists have this unique position where they can go in there. And if they can focus in on a particular scene and bring it back, you give the chance to bring that souvenir for yourself and for others. So it's a unique position with these psychedelics where it allows you to go in and go where a camera can't go. So here I was at the time creating a lot of realism, and I started to see how it was pointless. It was very useful for building up my artistic skills, and sometimes showing them to people could be like an artistic flex. Oh, look, I can do this very realistically. But it didn't go much deeper than that. There was beauty in it, but I felt like that was very much the same beauty that could be created through a camera and a printer. But going into these deep psychedelic experiences and bringing back these visionary realms was something that could only at the time really be done by a witness there, being there personally. So I saw this wonderful opportunity. I was like, why would I be doing any other form of art or be inspired by anything else if this is the most inspiring thing I have experienced? So I started to dedicate myself to creating art inspired by DMT and visionary realms. Later, they expanded to making art inspired by meditation and lucid dreaming and all forms of altering one's natural state of consciousness. But I want to share with you a bit about my first few DMT experiences, which were very impactful. So, the first one, my first full experience, I prepared for it just like how one does for ayahuasca. I did the whole preparation of the mind, body, and spirit and created an altar. I wrote down my intention. My intention was to go in there and receive a vision to help raise the collective consciousness. And that was very clear. So when I did the DMT. I was by myself and I went in there and I was greeted by beautiful fractal realms and these machine elf jester beings. So as soon as I was in there, I was practice letting go and I felt a lot of love and a beautiful experience. Very hard to put into words. I'm just summarizing. But I started seeing these beings made out of fractal light, gesture-like beings. I asked them, because I was like, I had my clear intention. I was like, hey, I'm here to receive a vision to help raise the collective consciousness. And these elves start laughing. They start laughing hysterically at my question. But I'm very patiently there just awaiting the answer because I have a clear goal. And after some time, they stop laughing and then they tell me, they look at me and they're like, hey, just tell them to come visit us. So they told me to tell you guys to just go visit them. So the experience ends, and I sketch out exactly how that moment looked, what those beings look like, and I end up creating an artwork, which I'll show on the screen now, called Come Visit Us. And it's how that moment looked like with those two elves. And the elves are intertwined with the space. They're almost like part of the space, so it's hard to tell where they're at, but I'll point them out. But these two elves, and then everything's made out of light and a lot of like geometric patterns. And I named the piece Come Visit Us. So that was the first piece I did inspired by N-N-DMT. Shortly after, I did another journey to go deeply in there. And this one, if the other one wasn't like a breakthrough, this one was a full dissolve into, yeah, full breakthrough. It's funny just remembering this one. This was actually one of my most beautiful psychedelic experiences to date. And this one, again, I prepared for it like I prepare for an ayahuasca ceremony, did the altar, wrote down my intention. And this one is very interesting. So, this one ended up creating one of my most iconic and famous pieces, which I'll share in a second. But basically, I went in there and I took a very large dose just because I wanted to go deeper this time. And to the point where I couldn't have taken any more. But basically, okay, I'll do my best to put this into human words. But basically, if you can imagine seeing from your eyes, so your perspective of view, I started to jump. So imagine like you're seeing from your viewpoint out of your eyes, and then you jump into someone else's viewpoint and you're looking out of their eyes. So I started to jump through different viewpoints, looking out of other people's eyes very rapidly. I started to switch like the viewpoint of where I'm looking from. Through all humans and then through animals and then other beings that I didn't know, it started to flash through their viewpoints very quickly. And it started to have the same effect that a fan has. If you look at a fan, you can see its multiple blades. But as it starts to spin faster and faster, it starts to look like one solid form. That's like the most similar thing I can describe it to. But basically, I started to jump through the viewpoint of all beings in existence so rapidly that I started to see connecting being behind it all. And I started to see what I would call the infinite self, source, God, whatever you want to call it. But I started to see that behind all the possible viewpoints of all beings in existence, there was this infinite being that's beyond life and death. That was the one looking behind all the eyes, the actor behind all the masks in existence. And it was playing this game of life, this game of all these different characters. And I started to remember that part of myself that is infinite, that part of not just Juliana, but of all of us that transcends birth and death, that transcends life, that is part of that infinite consciousness. and started to remember the cosmic game. And from there, I came out of that experience and I sketched it out. Of course, really, these experiences would be best described but by some sort of a video would be more accurate because it is a dynamic experience. But as a 2D artist, I did my best to create a single artwork that represented that experience, and I called it The Infinite Self Plays the Game. It's about the infinite self playing the game of existence. And it was a very popular piece, and from there, I felt like after a couple years, I felt like I didn't do it justice. So I ended up creating a larger version that was about 5.5 feet tall. I'll put some images of that. So I did actually a revision version with more detail and more time and effort dedicated to it. It's still the piece that I've put the most time into in my life. I spent over 3 years working on it, which is crazy. But yeah, I'll probably show some of those on the screen now. Since those experiences, I've had many other DMT experiences. It is by far the psychedelic I have worked the most with, and even though later on I ended up doing 5-MeO DMT, which was more intense and more powerful, and I would say is the most powerful and impactful psychedelic experience I have done, and which I did a video of. I'll put the link in the description. 5-MeO was very beautiful, but it wasn't visionary. NN is the thing that has impacted my art the most and feels like the most cozy and comfy experience for me. It feels like that's my medicine, even though I would say 5-MeO is the most beautiful experience. And then it's still the experience that has impacted my art the most and that I've made the most artworks inspired by. And even though now not all my artworks are inspired by NN-DMT, a lot of my art, I think a lot of people still feel the DMT essence in it. And I can't help but a lot of my art to have that vibe. I ended up making a whole Hindu deity series inspired by me interacting with the Hindu deities on DMT, as well as just all sorts of realms I've explored with that medicine. And till this day, even though now I haven't worked with NN for a couple years, I still find its themes and its style being embedded in my creations. And now, when I meditate very deeply, I still experience a lot of the DMT realms and am able to access them to create more artworks from without having to actually do DMT. Even though the thing is, we have DMT in our bodies. So I think that once you start opening that door enough times, you learn how to tap into it yourself, into your own DMT. Overall, these experiences showed me how creativity is a spiritual practice and how creating from spiritual experiences to me is the most impactful thing I can share. And it really brought up the question of what is worthwhile making art about. And I believe for me, that answer is spiritual experiences, because those are what cameras can't do. Those are some of the most impactful experiences of life. So why not share them? Why not put the time and effort to express those? Overall, the takeaway from these experiences is not necessarily that everybody has to do DMT to create visionary art, but DMT showed me that making visionary art was the most rewarding. And it was about, even though now I understand that there's a lot of methods that one can use that don't involve substances, such as meditation and lucid dreaming, it showed me clearly how having these spiritual experiences is worth creating art about and sharing those artworks, because spiritual experiences are what inspire us the most in day-to-day life. And it just gave me that clarity I needed to start being a visionary artist and stick with creating visionary art and not other things. If this message spoke to you, I encourage you to create art about what inspires you most, to get inspired through meditation, through various spiritual practice, and create from them, because those can be some of the most wonderful things we can share and some of the highest vibrational experiences. And the highest vibrational experiences create the highest vibrational art. And the highest vibrational art creates the biggest impact. If you'd like to see more videos like this, talking about plant medicines, all things mystical, and guided meditations, subscribe to my channel. And if you're inspired by these artworks, check out my website. I have originals, prints, and I also teach online classes for creativity, meditation, and visionary art. Thank you so much for watching, and lots of love to all of you.